Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
When my wife and I found a charming house on the edge of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association, thinking we'd struck gold with a perfect balance of community and privacy. At first, everything seemed fine. We paid our dues, attended the occasional barbecue, and kept our lawn mowed to the exacting standards set by the HOA board. But as time went on, the cracks in this perfect facade started to show. It began with little things. The HOA president, who everyone called Karen, and yes, she lived up to the name, started nitpicking every detail of our lives. One day, she marched up to our door, clipboard in hand. Karen told me our mailbox was the wrong shade of beige and that we needed to repaint it immediately. I explained that it was the same color it had always been, and that we hadn't touched it since moving in. Karen insisted it had faded and that we needed to paint it or face a fine. This was just the beginning. Soon we were getting notices for everything from the height of our grass to the color of our curtains. It felt like we were living under a microscope, and the worst part was we were paying for the privilege. The breaking point came when Karen decided that all houses needed to have identical landscaping. She proposed a community beautification project that would cost each household thousands of dollars. At the next HOA meeting, I couldn't hold my tongue anymore. I expressed my frustration, pointing out how ridiculous it was that we were already paying high dues and questioning why we should fork over more money for something we didn't ask for. Karen smugly replied that it was for the good of the community and suggested that if we didn't like it, we could always move. Her smug tone set something off in me. I decided right then and there that I was going to find a way out of this HOA nightmare. I started digging into the bylaws, spending late nights poring over legal jargon. That's when I stumbled upon a golden nugget of information. The entire structure of the HOA hinged on one thing: connection to the community well. Could this be our ticket to freedom? I started talking to my neighbors, and it turned out I wasn't the only one fed up with Karen's iron-fisted rule. We formed a little rebel alliance of sorts, meeting in hushed tones at backyard barbecues and kids' birthday parties. We discovered that if we could switch to municipal water, we'd no longer be bound by the HOA's rules. It wasn't going to be easy or cheap, but we were determined. We rallied 44 households on our street to join the cause. We researched, made calls, and eventually found a government grant that could help offset the costs. We negotiated bulk rates with a lawyer and a plumber, bringing our costs down from a whopping $12,000 per house to just $3,000. The day we presented our plan to the city council was nerve-wracking. Karen and her cronies were there trying to block our efforts. But when we explained our situation, the council was surprisingly sympathetic. A council member told us they understood our predicament and agreed to the necessary street work for the water connection if we could organize the logistics. Karen spluttered and protested, but the decision was made. We were on our way to freedom. The process took months of hard work, but finally, the day came when we turned on our taps and municipal water flowed freely. We were out of the HOA, despite being surrounded on three sides by HOA members. But the story doesn't end there. Word of our escape spread, and soon, other homeowners on the outskirts of the HOA started looking for ways out too. Some dug their own wells, effectively removing themselves from the HOA's clutches. Within a year, the HOA map looked like Swiss cheese. Karen was beside herself, watching her little kingdom crumble. The last time I saw her, she was standing in her perfectly manicured lawn, staring at the for sale signs popping up all over the neighborhood. I commented on how beautiful the day was and how funny it was that things change. Karen angrily responded that I had ruined everything and that it had been a perfect community before I came along. I calmly told her that it was her idea of perfect, and now people had a choice. We'd taken on a system that seemed unbeatable and found a way out. Now our street is a mix of HOA and non-HOA houses, and we all get along just fine. It was a quiet afternoon when my wife's water broke. We were both excited and nervous as we grabbed our bags and headed for the car. When we stepped outside, I saw a car blocking our driveway. At first, I thought it was just someone making a quick stop, but then I saw her, the woman who would become the bane of my existence for the next few minutes. She was marching up to our door with a scowl on her face. I tried to explain the situation quickly, telling her we needed to leave immediately because my wife was in labor. The woman ignored me completely and started ranting. She complained about the neighborhood and how our lawnmower had woken her up at 7 a.m. the day before. She asked if we knew how inconsiderate that was. I was stunned. Was she serious? My wife let out a pained groan beside me. I apologized for the noise but explained that we really needed to go, emphasizing that my wife needed to get to the hospital right away. The woman dismissed my concerns, saying she was sure my wife was fine and that this wouldn't take long. She demanded that we never mow our lawn before 10 a.m. again. My wife was bent over, clutching her stomach, and this woman was lecturing us about lawn care. I pleaded with her to move her car, stressing that this was an emergency. She refused to change the subject, insisting she wouldn't leave until we agreed to her terms. At this point, my brother, who had been staying with us to help out, came outside to see what the commotion was about. He took one look at the situation and his face turned red. My brother asked what was going on, clearly angry. The woman sarcastically remarked about another rude person joining the conversation. My brother has always had a short temper, and I could see him struggling to keep it under control. He told the woman that his sister-in-law was about to have a baby and demanded she move her car immediately. The woman was indignant, asking how he dared speak to her like that. She reiterated that she wouldn't go anywhere until she got an apology and a promise about the lawn mowing. That was the last straw for my brother. He stormed past Karen, ignoring her protests, and marched straight to her car. Without hesitation, he reached through the open window, grabbed her keys from the ignition, and threw them as far as he could into a nearby field. The woman was outraged, accusing my brother of destruction of property and threatening to call the police. My brother dared her to do so, pointing out that the police would be interested to hear how she was preventing a woman in labor from getting to the hospital. Karen's face went pale as the reality of the situation finally seemed to sink in. She looked at my wife, who was now leaning against me, breathing heavily. The woman stammered, realizing the gravity of the situation. I asked her once again to please move her car. Without another word, Karen ran off to search for her keys in the field. My brother helped me get my wife into our car, and we were finally able to back out of the driveway after he and I managed to push Karen's car out of the way. As we drove off, I could see Karen in the rearview mirror frantically searching the grass for her keys. My brother was standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching to make sure she didn't try anything else. We made it to the hospital just in time. A few hours later, our beautiful baby girl was born, and when I held her in my arms, the stress and anger from earlier melted away. I guess it takes a wake-up call to make people realize how ridiculous they're being. After losing my job at the tech startup I'd been with for the past 2 years due to budget cuts, I found myself struggling to make ends meet. The irony wasn't lost on me. From rising star in a promising company to barely scraping by, all in the blink of an eye. But rent waits for no one, and here I was, clutching my hard-earned cash, ready to get a money order. At least there was a silver lining. My old friend from my days working here was behind the counter. My friend greeted me warmly, asking how I'd been and calling me a stranger in a playful tone. I responded with a self-deprecating joke about living the dream, if the dream meant barely affording rent and coming back to haunt old workplaces. And we shared a laugh. It was nice to have a friendly face in the midst of my struggles. When she processed my transaction, we fell into an easy rhythm of catching up and joking around. The store was quiet, with only a few customers milling about, so we took our time. My friend asked about my future plans, wondering if I had any job prospects on the horizon. I admitted to having a few leads, but nothing solid yet, and expressed my attempt to stay positive despite the circumstances. Then she looked over my shoulder, a puzzled look on her face. Before I could turn to see what caught her attention, I felt someone standing uncomfortably close behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I felt the stranger's shirt brush against my arm. Instinctively, I stepped to the right, putting some distance between us. I turned to face the intruder, my voice coming out harsher than I intended as I demanded to know if I could help him. The man, middle-aged with a receding hairline and an ill-fitting polo shirt, had a smug grin plastered across his face. He explained that he thought I worked there, retreating to the "please wait here" sign. His weak excuse only fueled my irritation. I snapped at him, pointing out that even if I did work there, it didn't excuse invading my personal space, and that having a conversation with someone doesn't give anyone the right to be rude. I turned my back on him, my heart still pounding. My friend behind the counter looked relieved that I hadn't completely lost it and decked the guy. We finished up my transaction in silence, the earlier light-hearted mood shattered. The man then cleared his throat and asked if he knew me from somewhere, wondering if I used to work at the store. I froze, realizing he might have recognized me from my time as an employee. But that didn't excuse his behavior. I turned to face him one last time. I confirmed that I had indeed worked there a few years ago. I then gave him a piece of my mind, explaining how that experience taught me to deal with entitled customers who think they can do whatever they want. I advised him to treat people with respect, regardless of whether they're employees or not, emphasizing that you never know what someone's going through or who they might be. A few other customers who had witnessed the exchange nodded in agreement with my words. My friend intervened, asking the man to step back and wait his turn. She emphasized that they take the comfort and safety of all customers seriously. As I walked out of the store, I heard the man spluttering excuses, but the damage was done. The other customers in line were giving him disapproving looks, and I could see my friend talking to her manager, likely reporting the incident. I may have been down on my luck, but at least I still had my dignity. I've been in the e-commerce game since 2004. It all began when I lost my job at a big corporate firm during the dot-com bubble. With bills to pay and a family to support, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started small, selling handmade crafts online. Over time, I expanded into various product lines, from home decor to electronics accessories. It wasn't easy, but I built my business from the ground up, learning the ins and outs of online marketing along the way. For nearly 2 decades, I've run a clean operation. No lawsuits, no major complaints. I've always tried to do right by my customers. So imagine my shock when I received a lawsuit in the mail from some guy in Maryland claiming I'd wronged him with my email marketing. I was in my home office when I opened the envelope. At first, I thought it was a joke. I read the contents aloud to myself, noting that the plaintiff was claiming the email subjects might be misleading and that he may not have signed up in the first place. I was stunned to see he was seeking $500 per email, totaling $16,000. This guy was upset about marketing emails he'd been receiving for years without ever hitting the unsubscribe button. It didn't make any sense. Curious about who would file such a ridiculous lawsuit, I decided to do some digging. A quick Google search revealed something interesting about our plaintiff. I muttered to myself as I discovered he was an ex-attorney who had been disbarred in 2014 and now sued businesses personally. It all started to make sense. This guy wasn't a disgruntled customer. He was a professional plaintiff. He'd lost his law license and now made a living by filing frivolous lawsuits against businesses like mine, hoping we'd settle rather than fight it out in court. Frustrated and worried, I called my wife to vent. I told her she wouldn't believe what had just happened. When she asked what was wrong, noting that I sounded upset, I explained that I had just been served with a lawsuit. I told her that an ex-lawyer in Maryland was suing us for $16,000 over marketing emails. My wife was shocked, asking if he could even do that. I explained that apparently he could, and the worst part was that I'd have to hire a lawyer in Maryland to defend myself. I mentioned it could cost thousands just to fight this nonsense. My wife pointed out that we couldn't afford to pay $16,000 either, and asked what we were going to do. I admitted I didn't know yet, but assured her that I wasn't going to let this scammer bully us. After talking it over with my wife, I decided to reach out to a lawyer friend for advice. He couldn't represent me in Maryland, but he might have some insights. I thanked him for taking my call and mentioned I had a bit of a situation. He asked what was going on, and I explained the whole story to him, from the lawsuit to what I discovered about the plaintiff. My lawyer friend said it sounded like I was dealing with a professional plaintiff and that these guys make a living off frivolous lawsuits. When I asked what I should do, explaining that I couldn't afford to pay him but fighting this in court could be expensive too, he gave me some advice. He suggested I first check if my business liability insurance covered this. If not, he said I'd need to hire a lawyer in Maryland. He warned me not to ignore it or I'd risk a default judgment. I agreed to look into that and asked if he had any other advice. He recommended having my lawyer look into this guy's lawsuit history, saying that if he'd filed dozens of similar cases, it could help my defense. He also mentioned that if the case was truly frivolous, I might be able to seek attorney fees. Taking my friend's advice, I checked my insurance policy and was relieved to find out that it did cover legal defense for such situations. I immediately filed a claim and was assigned a lawyer in Maryland. Over the next few weeks, my lawyer and I worked together to build our defense. We discovered that our plaintiff had indeed filed over 50 similar lawsuits in the past 2 years alone. Many businesses had settled, but a few had fought back and won. When our day in court finally arrived, I was nervous but determined. The plaintiff presented his case, claiming emotional distress from misleading email subjects. But when it was our turn, my lawyer tore his arguments apart. He addressed the judge, pointing out the plaintiff's history of filing frivolous lawsuits against small businesses. He emphasized that the plaintiff had received my client's emails for years without unsubscribing, which he could have done at any time. My lawyer argued that this lawsuit was nothing more than an attempt to extort money from a legitimate business. The judge listened carefully to both sides before making his decision. He said that after reviewing the evidence, he found this lawsuit to be without merit. He dismissed the plaintiff's claims and ordered him to pay the defendant's legal fees. Not only had we won, but this scammer would have to pay our legal costs. It had been a stressful few months, but we'd come out on top. I couldn't wait to share the good news with my wife and get back to focusing on what I loved, running my business and serving my customers. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.